Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following. Ministry Paper number 65 of 2017, entitled 9 Replenishment of the Special Development of the Caribbean Development Bank, CDB. Annual Report and Financial Statements of the Jamaica Information Service for the year 2014-2015. Annual Report of the Chase Fund for the financial year 2015-2016. Annual Report the Law Reform 2017. Under the Law Reform Zones of Special
House of Representatives, petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally.
Honourable Minister, to answer questions number 5 on the order paper standing in your name. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Reid. Minister Reid. Thank you, Senator Fraser.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Question 1. Will the Minister please state whether or not the National Environment and Planning Agency, NEPA, refused to grant a license to Duncan's Bay Development Company for sand mining at Duncan's Bay? Response. The Natural Resource Authority, NRCA, refused an environmental permit application, reference number 2015-07017 EP0208, for mining and quarrying of beach sand to Duncan's Bay Development Company Limited on the 19th of January 2016 on the recommendation from the and Planning Agency. If the answer to 1 is in the affirmative, will the Minister please state what were the reasons for the refusal to grant the license? Environmental permit. Response. The proposed activity would compromise the significant ecological value of the beach as it relates to its function as a home for microorganisms which have a significant ecological function, as well as a nesting site for sea turtles. The applicant, although claiming that the site experiences accretion, failed to provide any comprehensive and conclusive study which supports this claim. As a result, the uncertainty about the subsequent accretion of the sand post-removal is one which is of great concern to the agency. Thus, in the absence of conclusive information, the agency believes that the risk to the environment is too great to be supported at this time. Answer: the Prime Minister was not involved in the appeal in his capacity as the Minister with responsibility for the environment. Response: the Honourable Prime Minister did not hear the appeal directly. The appeal was heard by the Minister without portfolio with responsibility for land, environment, climate change, and investment. 3, if the answer to 2B is in the affirmative, would the Minister please state what were the Prime Minister's reasons for so doing, and what information, if any, provided to the Prime Minister which was not considered by NEPA when it made its decision? And the answer I will refer to in 4B. If answer to 2C negative, would the Minister state who heard the appeal and under what authority did such person or persons hear the appeal? The response: the appeal was heard by the Minister without portfolio with responsibility for land, the environment, climate change, and investment. Such persons which was not in their submission and presented new information that had not been provided to NEPA and was instructed to do so. Subsequent to this Bay Development Company Limited, QL 2064, the report contained background information outlining the MGD being the beneficiary funding by the government of Jamaica to conduct a project to identify quantify and qualify retired carbonate sand along the north coast of Jamaica. The report identified Duncan's Bay as an area where significant volumes of retired carbonate sand was available. The report continued to outline a series of occurrences within Duncan's Bay Development Company Limited, the MGD, and NEPA regarding quarrying activity that had taken place at the site at Duncan's Bay as part of the quarry license, quarrying that had taken place outside the licensed area, and the decision on the way forward to have the area rehabilitated. Observations post-rehabilitation exercise, which indicated that in the disturbed area, there's active deposition. Vegetation had begun to regenerate, and there was no sighting of sea turtle nesting site. The minister, having heard compelling arguments about Duncan's Bay being a known turtle nesting area, the submission of the MGD and the appellant's claim that there was an abundance of sand available at the site, adjourned the appeal and requested that the verification exercise be undertaken to better inform a decision on the appeal. The verification exercise was in fact undertaken on the 20th of July 2016 at the location with representatives of Duncan's Bay Development Limited, the MGD, and NEPA. At the end of the inspection, the following recommendations were made. A trenching exercise should be undertaken to determine the depth of the sand at the location, as this is only done at the west quarry site and not at the east quarry site. B, cross-section or topographical survey should be done by a commissioned land surveyor from the backshore area at the foot of the slope break to the high water mark. And C, that the developer should provide the length of the shoreline area that is being proposed for the quarrying activity, and this show reference for ease of identification. This information was deemed important to aid in the estimation of the quantity of available sand, to help in the proper assessment of the conditions at the site, and to ascertain the extent of the area that will be directly affected by the proposal. By way of findings of the assessment, A, trenching exercise. The trenching exercise was conducted on the 26th of July 2016 with representatives from Duncan's Bay Development Company Limited, a commissioned land surveyor, MGD, NEPA, and the contractor. 14 boreholes were made from east to west along the foreshore. The boreholes were done at a distance of between 3.7 meters and 14.8 meters from the high water mark. The boreholes were done to the depth at which groundwater was seen, measured then. The results show that there are a maximum depth, 2 meters, and an average depth of 1.435 meters of sand. The boreholes which were furthest from the high water mark yielded depth nearer to 2 meters, whereas those closer to the high water mark yielded a depth of about 1 meter. B, results of the topographical survey provided by the applicant submitted by the commissioned land surveyor. The results of the survey show that there is a significant catchment area to the south and west of the site, coming off the hill area further south. It is, however, noted that this area is recorded at ground level or spot heights at close to zero. The backshore dune area rises to a maximum height of approximately 6 meters and is the area that is most heavily vegetated, suggesting that the vegetation may be a contributor to the materials being retained. Depths of between 1 and 2 meters were noted in the areas closer to the sea, which are devoid of vegetation. C, length of the shoreline area that is being proposed for the quarrying activity. From the survey data provided, the length of the area which is to be considered is 36 cubic meters. Question 5, will the minister please state whether or not there was a decision but the minister directed that the environmental permit shall include conditions to mandate that the appellant consult with the residents. Such conditions were in fact included in the environment permit. If the answer to 5 is in the affirmative, would the minister please state when and where the consultations were held and what form did the consultations take? Response: the consultation was tied to the EP conditions and mandatory. Question 7, if the answer to 5 is in the negative, would the minister please state what were the reasons for the absence of consultation? Response: as aforementioned, consultation was made a requirement of the environmental permit requirements. Condition 37 to 8 were included as follows. Condition 37, Duncan's Bay Development Company Limited shall conduct a public consultation, sensitization of the citizens of the area and other stakeholders in order to ascertain and clarify all issues and concerns regarding the proposed mining of sand at the East Quarry site prior to the commencement of the mining activity. Condition number 38, the record of the permittee's actions to investigate the validity of each complaint and a record of actions taken to address each complaint. Question 8, would the minister please state what consideration was given to the protection and conservation of the area as a sea turtle nesting region, and why was this consideration submitted to the private commercial interest of the proposed development? Response: focused consideration was given to the protection and conservation of the area as a sea turtle nesting region, which was reinforced by robust conditions of approval, which would be jointly monitored by the Mining and Geological Division and NEPA. Considerations included: A, the volume of sand reduces the area to be impacted, to be done under the direct supervision and the monitoring of the MGD and NEPA. The prescribed skimming operation will limit and control the scope of the operation and reduce the potential impact on turtle nesting areas. Condition number 2 to 7. C, the applicant is required to rehabilitate and restore. D, the applicant is prevented 19, 20, 23 to 26 and 28. E, the activity was restricted to operation times outside of the peak active turtle nesting season, which is usually June to eggs identified and report on such activities undertaken under the supervision of the MGD and NEPA. Conditions 30 to 36. Prior to the undertaking of any activity, the applicant is required to undertake public consultation, sensitization with the citizens of the area and other stakeholders to clarify all the issues and concerns regarding the proposed mining and maintain a complaints register. Condition 37-38. The consultation is expected to be undertaken in accordance with operational guidelines for conducting. Enthusiasts and other stakeholders will be afforded the opportunity to express their concerns and have them clarified prior to commencement.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Baines.
Thank you, Minister, for the much long-awaited answers to my question. Just a few follow-up questions, Minister, and I'm not quite sure if you are able to answer, or you'll have to get advice, considering it's a very technical area. But as the Minister of Information, I know that you may just be an all-rounder. I want to ask you, first of all, let me just make a statement, Minister, that I note the emphasis that you have placed on the condition in the order relative to public consultation. And let me say that it is bad policy. I recognize the effort that is placed here in terms of doing consultation post, but good policy dictates that consultation ought to be done to any determination. And so it would have been more acceptable, certainly to the residents in the Duncans Bay area for the consultation to have been done prior to the Prime Minister or his designate making this determination, granting this license, and the conditions that are attached thereto. And so in the future, I ask that before nations are made, that consultation be made with the community so we can ascertain their views, their concerns, so that the determination will consider those concerns. And in that light, I want to go to one of the conditions that you also, and I think it is conditions 30. Minister, I don't know if I understand the intent, but the question I have is, who will monitor this complaint register? And what will be the effect of the complaint register? Because I have been reliably informed that there are already complaints from the residents that are not being addressed. So I shall like to find out from you, where is this complaint register kept? Who monitors it? And who ensure that the complaints are being dealt with? I would also, I'll ask one at a time and then, yes, thank you.
And then the log must include a record of the permittee's action to investigate the validity of each complaint and a record of action taken to address each complaint. So the monitoring would be done by MGD and NIPO, because if there are any breaches, then of course remedies could be applied.
Well, I ask you then, Minister, whether this is being done, because to my certain knowledge, and I do stand to be corrected, but the information that I have received is that there are complaints at present dealt with. So I would ask you, one, to investigate that. Secondly, I shall also wish to ascertain from you, sir, whether you could say how often is this complaint registered monitored. I don't know if it's that NEPA goes in weekly or monthly, but I shall like to know that, and whether there is any feedback to the complainant or to the community.
I shall investigate and report back.
Thank you, Minister. You're very cooperative today. Minister, but you know, I think he's doing the best he can, so he's cooperative. On page 3, you, in response to question number 4, you mentioned the AG's opinion on the 11th of July, and I wondered whether we could have sight of that report, sir. You may not have it on you, but I would be grateful if that could be available. Page 3, sir. Second paragraph, where you reference the AG's report. I shall like to have sight of that, sir. Yes, sir. The title report, Duncans Bay Development, is said to have been done by the Mines and Geology Department. This speaks to sand from the offshore, or whether it speaks to new sand on the onshore that has been deposited for extraction. So we'd like some clarification with.
I would wish that you would table those technical questions.
Minister, may I suggest that in future, when you have matters like this, that perhaps you get somebody from the technical relevant department, because I would like to know what a turtle enthusiast is, for example. Yes, Senator Mills.
I'm getting some counsel from senior counsel on this side in an effort to be understanding of the position in which Minister Reid finds himself. I'm going back on the report of the 26th of July 2016, and we're now on page 4, findings of the assessment. And the first finding was that of trenching exercise. I should wish to find out, sir, whether there was any ecological or modeling data that was brought to bear in this trenching exercise, and
Suggesting your table.
empowered to assist me much further with these questions, which I think so much about the environment and the community of Duncan's Bay. So perhaps if we, Minister, I will send you my follow-up questions. And through you, Mr. President, I could perhaps table the follow-up questions for the minister. He will get his technical assistant. But perhaps in the spirit of compromise and cooperation, you could make those answers available to me so that I could look at them prior to having a discussion here in the Parliament, if that is agreeable.
Bring Darrell the next time.
Maybe, yes. So I will yield to my colleagues at this point. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much. Senator Knight.
Thank you, President. Minister, at page 3, response. I'm a little bit confused here. It says that at the appeal hearing dated 16 June 2016, the Mines and Geology Division made a submission and presented new information. At the time when NEPA made the decision, was this information that MGD had, was it available at that time? And if it was, can you help me to understand why that would have been withheld from NEPA? And this report, Duncan's Bay, the MGD provided a document. So is it that that document, which throughout the response appears to have been the foundation for the appellate decision, that document was not available? Something is not adding up.
Mr. President, I again entreat the Senator to table his questions, and so I will respond to that.
It is contained here. And anyone responding would have or ought to have ascertained the answers to these obvious questions. It can't be that someone at the level of a minister is simply asked to come and read an answer without having been given an opportunity to understand what it is he's going to read, and especially if he's royal.
Senator Knight is asking for a response to his observation.
Available at the time when the first decision was made. I mean, I think you and I know that that's exactly what is stated here. Sir?
Senator is referring to page 3 where it says response at the appeal hearing dated 16 June 2016. That's the paragraph that he's making reference to.
One explanation, and I'm giving the explanation, and then you say you don't want me to explain. Oh.
No, I never said I don't want you to explain. Come now, Minister. Don't accuse me of that kind. Well, please stand and withdraw it.
Yeah, so my guidance would be that probably the terminology would be subject to other interpretation, but my guidance would be that at the point of appeal, this information is not after the appeal that the document was available. In other words, it's subsequent to the fact that the matter has been appealed.
With respect, I don't understand. Subsequent to the appeal, the MGD provided a document titled, and the title is there. Is it that that document was not considered at the time?
Again, to avoid any further speculation, can you allow me to go and research and get back to you on it? Okay? Very.
President.
Thank you, Senator Knight. Thank you, Senator Brown. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, sir. In answer to question 4, climate change and investment, I understand this to be one of the 4 ministers in addition to the Prime. Which of the 5 ministers? Well, we know it's not the Prime Minister, but which of the other 4 ministers has this responsibility for land, environment, climate change, and investment? That's the first question that I wish to ask. The second question, Mr. President, is in respect to at number 7 on page 6. Because as I understand, and others in Duncan's Bay, and their livelihood which may be affected, it's about the people. Not just so much technical issues, but the impact on the people. And where the question was, if the answer to number 5 is in the negative, would the minister, what were the reasons for the absence of consultation? Minister response pointed to conditions 37 to 38. I want to focus on 37. 37 says, Duncan's Bay Development Company Limited shall conduct a public consultation and sensitization with the citizens of the area and other stakeholders in order to ascertain and clarify all the issues and concerns regarding the proposed mining of sand at the East Quarry site prior to the commencement of the mining activities. This is now behind us in a sense, that decision. I want to know what mechanism put in place by NEPA and by the minister who took this decision to ensure that Duncan's Bay Development Company Limited actually carry out the consultation and sensitization that is necessary. Because it's one thing to declare that it should be done, but if there's no mechanism to ensure it is being done, to follow up, take the citizens of the area, then this appeal is one that favors the company but does not protect the citizens. I'm not even going to the turtles, because they will find a way to survive the cruelty of humans. And those are the questions I'd like answer in the follow-up.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just want to advise the senator that it is responsible for the areas so named. I'm sure you can check the GIS. But you can't imagine you're a senator over there and you don't know that? All right. So I'm saying go and check the GIS website and you get the information. No, I think that's a trivial matter. You know the answer to that. No, don't lie to me now. You said I'm to treat you with respect, and you are not being truthful. You are not being truthful. But you're not being truthful.
Respond or not, please, so we can.
Mr. President, I've noticed the minister has sat, but my questions have not been answered.
You sat because I was speaking to
Oh,
you.
sorry, I thought.
I think the question is whether or not the consultations were held, and if so, by NEPA. Senator Brown, hang on a minute. Mr. Minister, do you know if consultations were held, the mechanics used for the consultation, and when? I think that's what you're asking, Senator Brown. If you don't know, you could get back with the answer.
Yeah. Table, Mr. President, table the question, and I'll get back to you on those specifics.
Senator Brown, just where
Whoever that minister is, whether it be Minister Smith, Minister Warmington, Minister Chang, Minister Vaz, because the Minister of Information seems not to know which minister took the decision. So I need to note, we asked about the minister, but in terms of the 37, condition 37, what mechanism? Does that need a follow-up? And if NEPA and the ministers followed up to see if the condition has been met, this is important to the people of Jamaica.
Well, it mightn't require you to lay the follow-up question, but it certainly would require a follow-up answer. So in responding to Senator Fraser Binns, you could perhaps respond to those inquiries as well. Motions that may be of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sittings of the Senate. Motions for leave to introduce bills. The presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained. Public business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is my pleasure this morning, before we even commence public business, to just offer my own personal welcome to the Leader of Opposition Business in the Senate, as well as the new Senator, Senator Crawford, who I was not present to welcome on the day they were sworn in due to government obligations overseas. But I have to say that when for the very first time that I met Mrs. Scott Motley, Senator Scott Motley, it was in a women's political caucus context, and it was my very first time in such an environment. And the reasoned approach and the general supportive and engaging manner in which Senator Scott Motley addressed us as new members of the caucus, I have to say, was one of my most positive experiences in my entry into politics. And therefore, in circumstances, I feel even more sincere in the warm welcome that I wish to offer her this morning. Senator Crawford is not here. We all know him well, especially those who are on social media. And we welcome him to the Senate and look forward to his his contributions that will undoubtedly come on the matters before us. Mr. President, it has come to my understanding that the senators on the opposition side have an obligation. They will in fact be attending the funeral service of former Senator Marjorie Taylor. And in offering my condolences, doing further business beyond my opening of the NIDS bill this morning. And this will, I trust, accommodate members appropriately. In this context, of course, we understand that there are amendments, a significant number of amendments which have been provided. Yes, and they have been circulated on your table. So in my presentation, I intend to indicate, sort of explain some of the amendments and indicate where amendments are being taken so that our meeting next week will undoubtedly include references to these matters that may, in fact, address. We're all aware that, and from when we were going to take the bill on the first occasion, that there is a timeline that is important to us in respect of securing IDB funding for the implementation of the project. And if we are to have the matter before the board in time for us to stick with an effective timeline, that is to get it before their November board meeting, then we will have to pass it next week, Friday. So in those circumstances, perhaps we can, we can consult if any other steps need to be taken, but I just placed this morning's opening in that context. So, Mr. President,
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you, Leader.
Mr. President, it would be remiss of me if I did not respond and thank the Leader for her very gracious and warm welcome. It is very rare that one hears about positive influences in the political sphere, and I'm delighted that I was able to influence you, so perhaps you were able to now be sitting in that chair and to hold the very prestigious appointment which you do as a minister. We take note of your gracious facilitation so that we can attend the funeral of our dear and beloved Comrade Marjorie Taylor, and we extend to you, of course, our cooperation. And thank you.
Thank you very
Leader.
much.
Please continue, Minister.
Mr. President, the House of Representatives on September 19, 2017, passed the National Identification and Registration Bill. After robust debate and significant amendments with support on both sides, Mr. President, it now falls to us to take the next steps on this important matter. And we find ourselves this morning preceded by 38 years of indecision on the matter of Jamaica undertaking a national single identification system. We have therefore indicated by the steps taken thus far our commitment as an administration, as we have in respect of our matters, how we deal with anemic growth, how we deal with strangling bureaucracy. We're demonstrating again our commitment to ensuring that we take tough decisions which are long outstanding and ensure that we do the things that are necessary and differently where necessary in order to get a different result. Above all, it's important for us to take the tough decisions and the actions needed to implement them. So this issue is not a simple issue. We know that there has been much discussion in the public arena, there are concerns, and there have been extensive consultations in an attempt to address those concerns. Positions differ, and there are groups that feel strongly and passionately about their matters. Recognizing, of course, that it's government's role to weigh the concerns, because one group may not share the concerns of another group, and therefore when one group may feel that its concerns are not sufficiently reflected in the bill, it may be that that was as a result of a balancing of concerns between groups. And this is something that it'll be our responsibility to ensure that we effectively communicate and share as much as possible so that persons will understand the intent and the implications of the bill before us. Mr. President, we are this morning seeking to start the debate on a bill which will finally put into place a national civil registration and identity management system to improve the delivery of services in Jamaica using a single ID. Mr. President, this is aimed ultimately at optimizing the benefits of a digital identity and leveraging its use for accelerating development and security in our beloved country. Mr. President, identity plays a significant, in fact, a pivotal role in all our lives and cuts across so many sectors of the economy. And yet this right, I dare say even this human right, is out of the reach of so many of our brothers and sisters. As a government, we recognize the huge importance of moving towards a digital government and fixing the identity gaps in our country. We recognize huge potential lying within our grasp. Mr. President, I want to point to a small country, Estonia. Estonia has not enjoyed the 55 years of independence and freedom that Jamaica has enjoyed. They have a population of 1.3 million people, but they are 12th on the World Economic Forum's Ease of Doing Business. They have been described, and I want to share with you from an article, as one of the most advanced e-government systems in the world. And this includes a single digital ID that enables citizens to access all of its services in a secure environment. Applicants can obtain a digital ID that will let them register their business in a day, even less than a day as a matter of fact, open a bank account within hours, use e-taxes, and sign contracts from anywhere in the world. Georgia, similar country in terms of stage of development, but has, again, so included its population by allowing services to be accessible by a single identity that their progress and their growth has been exponential. Singapore is another country, small like us, and which has been independent for as long, and which has also sought to expand and build upon their robust national Singapore digital ID program called their Smart Nations Plan, which is, as we speak, increasing the number of government services and the level of security and efficiency that's being brought to online authentication to offer government services to their citizens. So, Mr. President, why not us? Why not us? And why not now? Jamaicans have excelled in so many spheres internationally, and yet as a whole, as a people, we have not yet in our 55 years of independence effectively harnessed our full potential, the full potential of our human capital in order to take this country to the heights we know we can and should achieve. So why not us, Mr. President, and why not now? We strongly believe that one of the keys to harnessing our country's full potential, our people's full potential, and one of the keys to actually achieving simplified processes that we've acknowledged for so many years that we need. Every year we speak about the need to eliminate bureaucracy for years. But we have not taken all of the steps that are needed to do so, and we feel quite clearly that one of the keys to doing this is identity. Identity and identification. We have to simplify that, and it will be at the heart of everything else. Mr. President, as a country, we must embrace and harness the potential benefits of a digital identity to build and develop our country. Nations that are serious about development all across the world, and in particular, developed countries, have utilized identity as a foundation to transforming governance and enhancing service delivery in the areas of healthcare, agriculture, voting, transportation, financial inclusion, access to basic services and welfare programs, amongst others. Mr. President, we believe that Jamaica and Jamaicans must use our digital strategy to establish a regional reputation for technological leadership and building digital ecosystems in which innovation, fairness, and transparency can thrive. Mr. President, this bill is a perfect opportunity for us to send through all of government a clear message that government institutions must work together, collaborate with each other, share infrastructure and investment in order to better serve our citizens and residents. We believe it's a perfect opportunity to send a message to all our people that we are part of Project Jamaica and that we're all present, accounted for, and included. So, Mr. President, what is this NIDS? The bill provides that all Jamaican citizens and persons ordinarily resident in Jamaica will be required to register for a lifetime national identification number and an identification card that will uniquely identify them. The term ordinarily resident, which is used generally, is one of the defined terms in the bill for better understanding and certainty. The national ID system will see the institution of a unique, reliable, and secure method of authenticating an individual's identity. So each person registered under the NIDS will be issued with a random 9-digit NIN, and 9-digit is fine because of the permutations and combinations that are appropriate for a population of our size with the projected growth rates. So it's scientifically determined. And this will be their unique identifier in the system. The number will be assigned permanently to the individual and shall not be assigned or reassigned to or be reused by any other individual during the lifetime or after the death of the individual. So this is not unusual. In the same way that the US, for example, issues its social security number. Even if you are a baby born overseas, born in Jamaica, to US citizens, and the parents go to register the baby to apply for a passport, that baby will get a social security number before it can get the passport, because it's part of the process of unifying one tracking identifier that will allow all government systems to work efficiently and effectively. Mr. President, information captured through the registration for a NIN will be stored in a secure national civil and biometric database, NCBD, and this is addressed in Clause 15. Mr. President, over the past 30 years, we have failed to have one single trusted identity, a unique trusted identifier supported by biometric information and that identifies, or rather that supports the identification and authentication and verification of all Jamaicans. Not having a unique, single, trusted way to identify all our people has contributed to several missed opportunities over the years. Inefficient delivery of service, as identity verification is slow and cumbersome, not always accurate, identity theft, inconsistent records management, social and financial exclusion, costly duplication of IDs by government institutions, business organizations requiring customers to provide more than one ID to verify an individual's identity, leading to increased transactional cost, time and inconvenience for some, but also entire inaccessibility for others. With the introduction of NIDS, Mr. President, our people, the private sector, and government will benefit. We will all experience convenience, increased convenience when doing business, as only one ID will eventually be required. The NIDS, as it will contain biometric indicators and use best practice international models and software, will significantly reduce the opportunities for identity theft and fraud. And people and companies alike will benefit from improved processes and services delivered by their government. The private sector will experience confidence when using one ID to verify an individual's identity. In addition, the NIDS will support the Know Your Customer requirements, which have to be addressed and incorporated within the financial sector. Mr. President, the government will benefit by improved efficiencies and cost savings based on the re-engineering of business processes, which will assist in greater delivery of online services. So we will experience, this is a vision, faster identity verification, which will reduce customer wait time, reducing in greater productivity. Improved immigration, border control, national security, and revenue assurance. Individual identity protection, fraud and identity theft reduction, more efficient access to private and public sector services, increased efficiencies in access to financial services, greater financial and social inclusion, a gateway to Jamaica becoming a digital economy, and identity documents for persons with special needs and undocumented Jamaicans, once more now allowing them to be brought into the fold. Persons have asked, why create a new database and not use one that already exists? And quite simply, Mr. President, the NIDS will be a new system specifically designed to capture clean, verified, biographic, and biometric data. So I think this is probably a matter which will be further discussed in the debate. So I will leave it at that. The intention is to have a new, clean system. Start from scratch rather than have to re-engineer any existing systems. That is the vision. But it undoubtedly will be a matter further debated. In respect of social and financial conclusion, Mr. President, I just want to say a few more words, because Article 6 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. And the fact is that far too many of our persons have no identification. They have no known identity before the law. And they're undocumented, and therefore in some ways they are invisible to the state. They're therefore unable to fully participate within our society, within the public or private sectors. Without identification, how does one receive assistance from the state, even if you are eligible? Furthermore, when you don't have valid ID, you're denied opportunities and possibilities to exercise your civil and social rights. Identification is fundamental. We have too many young people who are below the age of 18 without ID because they're not eligible for a voter's ID. They don't have the financial means or the need to apply for a passport. They don't have the opportunity or the means to apply for a driver's license, and therefore they're unable to receive, and they don't have a reasonable and nationally accepted photo ID. The NIDS will solve that. Mr. President, it was quite surprising for us when starting the HOPE program that more than a quarter of the young people who presented themselves to try to sign up for the opportunity had no ID whatsoever. So they are being assisted through the process of getting birth certificates, etc. But that is something that the NIDS will solve. Mr. President, all our people have the right to an ID. All our people should be accounted for. All of our people must feel and know that they matter. Yes. They must have a sense of belonging. Yes. Having an ID will help with that sense of belonging. Here, here. Mr. President, a national ID. In this context of embracing social and financial inclusion, we have to take that discourse from the theoretical, from the academic, and take it to action by implementing and providing, the state providing identification, verifiable, secure identification to all our people. So, Mr. President, in this context, and I regret that Senator Morris is not here, but an important segment of the population to note is that of persons living with disabilities. They are expressly addressed in Clause 6.65. We will be amending the definitions to remove the definition of persons living with disabilities because it's only addressed in one place, 6.5, and 6.5 actually incorporates the definition from the Disabilities Act. So that's just a tidying up matter. That's one of the amendments that's there. But we think that while we're doing better at registration of persons with disabilities, we still don't know the full numbers. Senator Morris is aware this is a process. And the NIDS team met with the organizations representing these very special citizens of our country. They met with the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, the Jamaica Association of Intellectual Disabilities, the Jamaica Association for the Deaf, the Jamaica Association for the Blind, And I believe Mensana, which is a mental health grouping, was also invited, but they were unable to. And this group met with the NIDS team to go through the processes and understand exactly what is intended under the bill. And what they have agreed is to enter into an MOU with the government to be able to have a framework in which to work through the sensitivities that will be needed and the provisions that need to be made in order to ensure that persons with disabilities are able to have their documentation, their information, effectively captured and easily captured, meeting them where their needs are. So that's another very positive aspect of the process that has been undertaken and the care that has been taken to ensure that we are living the concept of inclusion. So, Mr. President, the NIDS team has also advised that in all of the deliberations and all of the discussions with all of the stakeholders, two issues that have reoccurred consistently and at each meeting has been the concerns of how are we treating with the privacy of information and how are we treating with the security of the database. So, Mr. President, every Jamaican has a right to the protection and privacy of their personal data. And we're taking this matter very seriously. And it is in this context that we're adopting measures to use the most up-to-date international best practices and systems in formulating the NIDS database and the NIDS process. Mr. President, we can assure you that the NIDS is being viewed in the context of a complete end-to-end process: security, monitoring, and mitigation against potential risks. And as part of the project, a detailed cybersecurity strategy is being developed to support and secure the life cycle of the NIDS. Mr. President, in addition, we will be ensuring the security by enforcing strong measures in the bill as a deterrent for internal breaches. We'll be putting in place data usage and security policies that are consistent with international standards and practices, and these will govern and manage all physical and logical aspects of risk. Mr. President, physical and logical infrastructure will be put in place to manage and monitor the life cycle for users' authentication, and regulations and guidelines will be put in place for accrediting organizations so that when a bank or a credit bureau or any other body wishes to use the NIDS as its source of identity verification, that institution will have to be accredited with the NERA. So the NERA will have to make sure that its systems, its cybersecurity and its software is sufficiently robust for them to agree to it, to ensure the transfer of, to ensure that the data is as safe and secure as it can be. So organizations and institutions will actually be accredited by the NERA to use NIDS to simplify their own processes. Mr. President, of course, a robust public awareness campaign will also be undertaken, not only in respect of sensitization leading up to implementation of the NIDS to reduce the fear and concerns, but also on proper usage of the number and educating people how to protect their number and their card. So, Mr. President, it's also important to take into context that the Data Protection Bill has been tabled in Parliament. It was tabled recently and undoubtedly will be passed in short order before the system, in any event, is implemented. Mr. President, Part 8, clauses 42 to 45 are specific provisions which address the matter of security of the database and treating with privacy of individuals' information. Mr. President, I want to just briefly address the matter of our national ID system being a foundation and gateway to a digital economy. Mr. President, maybe the question is, how would Jamaicans benefit from a digital economy? It's viewed, Mr. President, as the new productivity platform and is regarded as the third industrial revolution. The internet economy is expected to generate new market growth opportunities, jobs, and become the biggest opportunity of mankind in the next 30 to 40 years. Jamaica cannot afford to be left behind any longer. We, in fact, must be a leader in our region in this area. And again, why not? Again, this is a new system. It requires change, and therefore we understand concerns and hesitations. But people expect a more efficient government delivering high-quality services with accessibility and courtesy, less transactional costs, and greater productivity. Governments all around the world have recognized this. They've recognized that old governance and delivery models will not meet citizens' expectations. Yes. And technology can be the facilitator of transformation. So the time has come, Mr. President, for us to embrace digital transformation and for the government to lead by example. We envision the day that people can choose. Instead of having to use their precious hours during the day to stand in lines, to walk, ride, or drive to different government offices to transact their public business, that they can sit at home in the evening and simply do their business online. Yeah. This can become a reality, Mr. President. This can become a reality. And this is, on the journey to e-governance, an important step. Mr. President, the NIDS will provide us with one ID to make our lives better, one ID opening new possibilities for truly inclusive economic growth and job creation, one ID to positively transform Jamaica into a digital economy. Mr. President, I'm now going to move to the clause by clause. Well, no, seek to hide for senators ease of reference where matters are going to be amended or where they have otherwise are being treated. As indicated before, the bill is set out in 12 parts. Mr. President, some of the amendments undertaken were really a tidying up exercise. And the first were encountered in the long title. We have taken out the words "and registration," and you will find that that is taken out several points within the bill because the enrollment process actually includes the registration process. And for clarity, therefore, it was thought it's not necessary to use both terms. So we are staying with enrollment, and therefore the words "and registration" have been removed in certain circumstances. Amendments also in this context being proposed to clauses 3A and 25. Another clarification which has been undertaken has been in the use of the terms verification and authentication, because it was observed that they were being used in the bill in ways that didn't clearly differentiate when the process of authentication was applicable and when the verification process would apply. So the authentication process will be used to prove a national identification number and a national identification card. And the verification process is the manner in which the accuracy of the information, the identity and demographic information behind the number will be established. So appropriate amendments, authentication and verification. Verification is the way in which the accuracy of the demographic and identity information behind the numbers will be established. So in this context, amendments have been made in the definitions of both authentication and verification, as well as in clauses 3, 16, 17, 20, 38, 39, 40, and 57, 1B of the bill. So again, the list of amendments is long, but some of it is because the consistency has to be maintained throughout. So one amendment has required a few more in order to ensure that all clauses speak properly to each other. Mr. President, another amendment which has been made in several places in the bill is the use of individual instead of person. So as we're all aware, under the Interpretation Act, person can include a corporate entity. And it was therefore thought that to make it quite clear that the NIDS is not being given to companies, the NIDS is an individual identification. That has been clarified. So that again is addressed in the long title. the memorandum of reasons and clauses 23 and 25. I think it's addressed in maybe one or two other clauses. Mr. President, the preliminary clauses 1 to 4 consists of the short title, the interpretation of terms used, as well as the objects and application of the bill. I just want to point out in clause 1, because it's very important. Clause 1 not only recites the long title and states that the bill will be brought into effect on a date to be appointed by the minister by notice published in the Gazette, but clause 1 subsection 2, which is being amended for clarity, and I'll just read the amended clause. Clause 2 says that a notice under subsection 1 may appoint different days in respect of different parts or provisions of this act. So we all know that acts can be passed and the provisions can come into effect on different days. And that is the intention with this one. It's appropriate because it's a type of bill that will require significant administrative changes. The incorporation of the Registrar General's Department, as well as the build-out of the biometric and demographic aspects of it. As you can tell, it will require significant administration. And therefore, this clause is intended to address an effective and efficient rollout. It's an important clause also because it addresses a concern which I have heard raised, and this is the concern about the mandatory nature of the NIDs. It's important that if it is that we are embarking on this path, if it is that the national identification system is to transform how we do things, if it is to include everyone, if it is to truly work and not just be something that we do part way, and as has been the case with other efforts down this path, then it must be mandatory. It must be that we all agree. There comes a point where, and there's a difference between making something mandatory and dictating something. I think there's a huge difference between that, Senator Brown. Thank you. You're right. But the point is that we are not naturally a disciplined society. I can say that without fear of contravention. All you have to do is work on the street. Walk on the street, drive down any street, and you will be quite clear. You're not seeing orderly lines formed as of person's own motion to board the bus, to get into taxis, etc. It's not a natural thing. So we need to ensure that there is a clear requirement in order to have this. No, part of the process certainly will be addressed by sheer convenience. There will be many people who recognize that it is simply convenient. It's more convenient to enroll, to get it. But there are others who need to know that it is necessary or they will not. Because that is why many people don't have IDs now. And that's why sharing information and having public awareness has got to be such an important part of this project. So the intention is not to seek from the outset to implement the fine that is in place for an offense, for the offense of failing to enroll. That is not expected to come into effect until 3 years after the bill has come into effect, 3 years later down the line. The 100,000? That's a perspective. So as I said, we've made amendments to clause 20, which addresses this issue. And certainly, there are, I think it's circumstances where people perhaps are so rooted in one way of doing things and are so resistant to viewing a positive outcome from changing how we do things, and how it is that something being required is not necessarily a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with discipline. There's absolutely nothing wrong with discipline. And I think that it is of concern to me where it is that persons would seek to sow discord around a matter which seeks to ensure that there is a disincentive to not participate in a process that will provide overall benefits. What has been maintained in the bill is that the offense will not result in a criminal record for people who fail to. And another thing that we need to clarify, and I'll use this platform today, is that there's no intention to make it mandatory to walk with your card. It will certainly be convenient for you to have your card. But I recall someone saying, it may be that I saw it on social media, someone saying that they would have a concern if it was a crime to not have the card, which is the circumstance in other countries. There are countries where it is an offense to not have your identity card with you. But we have not gone that route. The issue is enrollment. The issue is ensuring you are enrolled for the existing population, ensuring your children are enrolled, and that you are enrolled to make sure that the system works. So one of the things, though, that we do wish to, that we will be proposing as an amendment is that, similar to amendments which have been made elsewhere, that the parish court judge will have the right to enforce to use other, make an order that will result in an effective enrollment, and of course can order community service, etc., and not only the fine. So that is an amendment which is being proposed. But I think what is important is the demonstration that we are serious, that this is a new requirement. We are changing how we do things, and we can't only continue to do everything bit by bit and in incremental steps in a way that, you know, we have to bring everybody on board. Yes. So, don't be distracted. Don't be distracted. Mr. President, Clause 3 sets out the objects of the bill. That is fundamentally the establishment of the National Identification and Registration Authority, and to develop and establish the National Identification System. The application of the bill is set out in Clause 4. It applies to Jamaican nationals, Jamaican citizens, and persons ordinarily resident in the island. So that will be persons who have been in the island for 6 months legally. They will be required to apply for a NIDS. And so there's an amendment to the marginal note as well as the clause itself. Clauses 5 to 14 address the governance structure of the authority and provides for the board as well as the office of CEO and deputy CEOs. The establishment of the authority, Clause 5, is actually amended within, it's in the list of amendments to address the establishment of the General Register Office in the authority. And this is to ensure that the Registrar of Births and Deaths, that everything comes across and is vested within the NERA. It had been, this is not entirely new, it had been proposed as an amendment to the Registrar Birth and Death Act in the 6th schedule, but it was felt that it's better placed in Clause 5, and therefore the opportunity is also being taken to make adjustments to that clause as well as the Registrar Births and Deaths Act at the same time. Clause 6, Mr. President, sets out the functions of the NERA: to administer the national ID system, develop appropriate systems and protocols for the security, secrecy, and necessary safeguards for the protection and confidentiality of information collected for and stored in the database, to develop policies, procedures, and public education programs, as well as to monitor and promote compliance with the legislation. Clause 7 addresses the minister's power to give policy direction to the authority, and Clause 8 places an obligation on both the authority and other public entities to cooperate and lend assistance where necessary to ensure that the authority is able to carry out its functions. Clause 9, Mr. President, provides for the appointment of a board of management. And it's important to note that as a result of bipartisan discussions in the House of Representatives, it was agreed that the board should be appointed by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister after consultation with the Leader of the Opposition. One issue that has arisen since then is the size of the board, and this is something that we're interested in hearing your views on as well. In terms of the size, it's a 19-member board as it stands, and there are persons who believe, personally, perhaps myself included, that it is a bit large and that there might be room because of some duplication that could be pared down. So we would be interested in the debate if that matter could be addressed by you as well. But the fundamental matter of appointment by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister after consultation with the Leader of Opposition has been accepted, and that is in Clause 1.5 of the first schedule that addresses the composition of the board. Mr. President, Clause 10 sets out the functions of the board, and also, sorry, clauses 11 to 14 address the appointment and employment of the CEO and the deputy CEOs and other officers. Of note, Mr. President, is Clause 14, which addresses periodic security clearance and background checks for all members of the board and other persons who are to be employed by the authority. This is in keeping with the need to recruit persons who meet the highest standards of integrity. And I invite members to really have a close look at that clause, because it is a very high standard, and it shows the commitment to the requirement to ensure that there is, and because of the repeated, you will have to do security, renewed security clearances during your tenure. And this again is to ensure that the system remains as robustly secure as possible. Mr. President, we have expanded the fit and criteria requirements to actually apply to the deputy CEOs as well, because we have the CEO with being fit and proper, and then the deputy CEO or deputy CEOs, because there will be more than one, that those persons didn't have the same criteria. And obviously they would be delegated responsibilities, as the CEO can't do everything. So we're ensuring that fit and proper requirements, the same as applied to the CEO, will apply to the deputy CEO. So that will be found in this part in the list of amendments. Mr. President, Part 3 deals with the Civil Land Identification Database in clauses 15 to 19. And this is it's referred to throughout the bill as the National Civil Land Identification Database. So the objectives, the purpose of the database is set out here, and how the changes can be made to the database are also set out. It has been proposed that clause 15.2 should be removed from the bill. It's being deleted because there was some uncertainty as to its interpretation. But the substance of it is not being removed. So you still will have some information that is mandatory and some that is discretionary based on whether it's available, whether the person can provide it, and what works. So you would not mandate that a person without a hand give fingerprint for obvious reasons. He would give something else. And so that ethos is maintained within the bill. Amendments are being proposed, in fact, Clause 20, to give effect to the substance of Clause 15.2. But before I get there, I'll just point out that Clause 17 is of significant importance because it clarifies the purposes for which the information in the database may exclusively be used. And it's to be noted that these purposes do not extend beyond what is reasonably necessary for the objects of the Act to be carried out. The opportunity has been taken, Mr. President, to clarify in Clause 19 a flow of information, again, dealing with the matter of registration and enrollment, as well as verification. And those are treated in 19. Part 4, Mr. President, deals with enrollment, clauses 20 to 22. And this requires, Mr. President, that subclauses 8 to 10 be renumbered as 10 to 12, and then a new clause 8 and 9 are being included. They're set out here. And this is where we deal with the fact that everything that's required to be provided in the database in the third schedule is set out, as well as states that subject to subsection 7, information provided there, which constitutes registrable particulars, may be included in the database if the authority considers the inclusion appropriate, having regard to the purposes of the database. And, Mr. President, Clause 9, which is, I believe, now renumbered 11, addresses the requirement. Clause 9, which is renumbered 11, addresses the fine. 13 addresses the ability of the authority to use lawful means to obtain information if it is not provided for by the applicant. Mr. President, I think this is, sorry, again, I'm just going to emphasize that again, the clause which implements 2013, that is the mandatory, that's the fine. That will not come into effect before 3 years after the bill is passed, and that will be clarified in the notice, in the appointed day notice. But also, 20 will be amended to ensure that there are further orders which can be given by the parish judge to ensure that there are other rulings which can be made or other penalties that can be imposed, such as community service. Mr. President, to be clear, time.
Because time has expired.
With permission of the leader on this side, Mr. President, the speaker time has expired. May we ask for the suspension of standing order to allow her to complete her presentation? Or may I allow the senator to complete her presentation?
Thank you very much, Senator Brown. The question is that the minister will permit the time to complete the presentation which she is making. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. So again, I commend that members, that senators look at the amendments made to Clause 20, which I hope on a balance will address their concerns, making clear that the offense will not be a criminal one, which leads to any criminal record, etc. And of course, having assured in respect of the time within which, because one would hope that most persons would have come on board as a result of the public education and the other processes which would be dependent thereon. But we do mean to ensure that persons should by then have come on board. Mr. President, Clauses 23 and 24 provide for the establishment of the unique random number, the national identification number, and that its assignments, its characteristics, and its assignment to individuals who have been enrolled and verified. And an amendment is being proposed to 24.1 to insert the words attributes to give effect again to the policy. Part 6 deals with the national identification card itself from clauses 25 to 40, dealing with the establishment and issuance of the national identification card and the necessary safeguards for its proper use and safe custody once it has been issued. Clauses 25 to 38 in particular set out the provisions for the eligibility, renewal, nature, validity, property, authentication, and other related matters with relation to the card. Amendments are being proposed to clauses 25 and 26. Again, those were referred to earlier, tidying up provisions in relation to the issue and renewal of the card. And we've also clarified the matter of fees, because there will be no fee for the first issue or for renewals. But lost, etc., might require fees, and those will be prescribed later down. So what this simply says is the state is bearing the cost of providing you with this ID, because we know that it is so important for you to have it, and it will be so useful. The state will bear the cost of your first issue and any renewal. Mr. President, Clause 29 is being amended to correct errors in referencing, and Clause 35 is being amended to address the issue of cancellation. The term revocation was provided for in 35, and just for consistency, we're ensuring that revocation is addressed in 19, while cancellation is addressed here in 35. Mr. President, Clauses 39 and 40 address access to your own information and records of request for verification. So Clause 39 provides for verification of an identity, and 40 provides for access to one's own information and records. And of particular note is 40 subsection 2, which provides that every registered individual is entitled to obtain from the authority a record of requests made to the authority about his or herself. Now, that's an important safeguard that persons can apply to know who has asked for information about them. This is part of the audit and security process. Mr. President, Clause 41. Clause 41 is another clause that has been the subject of some discussion. It is the one that addresses facilitation of delivery of services or goods. 41.1 makes it mandatory for public entities to request an individual to provide a national identification number or a national identification card in order to provide goods and services to the individual. And it provides that under subsection 2, that in the case of a private entity, it is optional. So, but I want to bring, Mr. President, to the Senate this morning an understanding of the context within which this works. And the amendment that has been proposed to 41.2, which sets out, because they were deleting 41.2, there was a framework that seemed to have been set out to propose a list of what were being defined as essential services, which would be exempt. But they would have created such an uncertainty around what circumstances within which you could use. So for example, let's say health services. If you exempt health services from the NID, then does that mean that you don't need a NID to access the universal health insurance when that comes? Is it that you don't need a NID to get insurance? Is it that all of those things would no longer be tied to? Would you lose the efficiency of understanding who your people are for the purpose of planning and delivering your health services? How do you eliminate the issues of cost and uncertainty and budgeting in your health system, which has forever, for so long, been ineffectively and inefficiently managed unless we are able to use the need to help carry that forward? So what exists? So what exists, Mr. President, is a context. And this is why information is important. Information is important, not fear-mongering information. This is why the approach that is being taken is one that protects the rights of citizens. So if you have a look at the new subsection, at the new subclause that's been provided, in for example, 41.3, it now provides that this section does not apply during a period of public disaster or public emergency as defined in Section 20 of the Constitution of Jamaica, or in any other situation that poses an immediate threat to health or life. Furthermore, Section 13, Section 13 I believe J, 13 of the Constitution. Pardon me for this. Provides, anyway, it's Section 13 H, in the Charter of Rights, of course, provides that all public authorities must provide, or rather all citizens have a right to be treated in an equitable and humane manner by public authorities, which would include these bodies. The fact is that the better approach rather than seeking to list everything which is exempt, which then takes out the entire utility that you're trying to achieve in the first place. The intent by these amendments that are proposed and by the protection which is already provided by the Constitution is to ensure that you protect the rights, that you don't, that the Act will not and the NIDS will not deprive any citizen of their rights. So that is, those are amendments which we can continue to discuss, Mr. President. So it will not operate in a way that will affect the fundamental rights and freedoms of persons or their access to government services, and especially in an emergency. So it's 13.3H, which gives persons in Jamaica the right to equitable and humane treatment in the exercise of the function of that public authority. So this exists already. So this is a protection that exists. So, Mr. President, under clauses 42 to 45, we address the matter of protection of information, which outline the obligations of the authority to secure and protect the information that it collects and stores in the database. So we should note, Mr. President, that clause 43 allows for the disclosure of information in specific stated circumstances only. For example, facilitating the finding or identification of a missing body or identifying an unknown dead body, as well as on applications to the court. Mr. President, we are, however, because of the circumstances within which one would make such an application, making it clear that such an application, whether it's in criminal circumstances or, of course, as listed, that it would be an ex parte application made before a judge in chambers. And a further amendment is also being proposed to clause 43.2 to bring clarity to the meanings of the words of public emergency, removing the reference to public health, which was inserted in error. They're all otherwise captured, Mr. President. Mr. President, 44.2 provides that core biometric information shall not be disclosed by the authority to any third party except under a court order, but we're adding to that, Mr. President, or with the authorization of the registered individual, so that if it is that a registered individual wishes his biometric information to be shared with another institution for the purposes of that institution, then that, of course, can be done. One wouldn't want to restrict someone from releasing their own information where they see it important and necessary. Mr. President, we're also drawing Senators' attention to clause 45.1, which provides that where access to core information in the database is reasonably required for the purpose of a criminal investigation or criminal proceedings, an officer not below the rank of Senior Superintendent of Police may apply to the Supreme Court for an order authorizing the authority. So therefore, and the circumstances under which such an order can be granted are set out. An amendment, however, is being made to ensure that 45.3b, that the subparagraphs in 45.3b are disjunctive. So the word or is being used to replace the word and. Certainly there would be no circumstance, if it remained as is, that a judge would ever grant such an order, because all three circumstances are unlikely to appear in any one case. Mr. President, 46 and 47 establish an appeals tribunal to which members of the public will be able to appeal any decision taken by the authority, and for the appeals tribunal to be empowered to conclusively determine the subject matter of the appeal. And recourse provided for, Mr. President, is, of course, will operate alongside remedies that will become available to persons under the Data Protection Bill, which, as I mentioned earlier, has already been tabled in the House of Representatives. Mr. President, Part 10, clauses 48 to 54, contain the provisions for offences and penalties for breaches of the provisions of the legislation. These offences and penalties are set out in a table in the 4th schedule. 48 and 50 are going to be amended, Mr. President, and they're set out in the list of amendments to correct certain errors. And the listing of offences in 52 has been reformulated for full consistency with the Cybercrimes Act. So in 48, the issues dealt with there is, of course, in relation to impersonation, the offenses of impersonation and attempting to. That language has been clarified because although it was an offense to impersonate, it wasn't to attempt to impersonate. That's been included now. And also it's an offense to allow or induce someone else to use an national identification card to impersonate someone else. Mr. President, Clause 53 and 54 have also been reworded to remove duplications and to clarify the enrollment and registration offenses and those related to the national identification card. And clauses 55 to 61, which is now Part 11, provide general provisions. 55 deals with secrecy, Mr. President, and it ensures that everyone who has an official duty or who is employed to the NERA is required to treat matters and documentation related to the NERA as secret and confidential. And in circumstances where confidential information is disclosed, except where required by law or pursuant to a court order, an offense under this clause will be committed. Mr. President, can just clarify there that I know that there are some concerns expressed about whether the secrecy should not be limited only to the to identity information. Identity information is going to be exempted under the Access to Information Act. So under no circumstances can just an average member of the public make a request for a release of identity information under the ATI. It will be exempt as of right. But the general treatment, that we feel is not sufficient. The general treatment of secrecy we feel is important for trust in the system. Everybody working in the NERA must, and when they, even after their appointment or termination ends, must treat with the information that they deal with under the NERA as secret and confidential unless its disclosure is otherwise permitted by the Act. We want that to be fundamental and to be clear. It is part of the trust building and part of the robustness of the system that we need to have in place. So we have dealt with it on two ends of the spectrum. Mr. President, 56 provides immunity to individuals from civil or criminal action who in good faith disclose information or submit documentation to the authority which is lawfully requested by the authority. And this is, of course, for interaction between government agencies and otherwise to ensure that the database is completed. And 56.2 provides similar protection for the staff and agents of the authority. Mr. President, 57 provides that the authority may, with the approval of the minister, make regulations that are consistent with the legislation. And 57.3 provides that the minister may amend schedules to this legislation other than the third schedule and the custodial sentences by order. And that order, of course, is subject to affirmative resolution in both houses. So I know there have been some concerns expressed publicly about the ability of a minister to amend a schedule by order. But once upon a time, that used to be par for the course, and it would just pass through. But now, and it has become the practice, it's being done by affirmative resolution. So it's not negative resolution. It does not go to regulations committee and then by mere effluxion of time come into effect. It must be passed by resolution in both houses. And that means that there's the opportunity of both houses to give parliamentary oversight and to debate the resolutions, to debate the orders when they're passed. So I think it's important that we don't make light of parliamentary oversight in this regard. Affirmative resolution has been, use of it, or its increased use, has been a positive development in the governance activity of Parliament. We use negative resolutions less because they do pass with less scrutiny than do matters treated by affirmative resolution. And we feel strongly that if we are to move to this, to treat with these matters effectively and recognizing that as this is an entirely new system, there may need to be amendments in order to operationalize that. Although as one can tell by the list of amendments, the sixth schedule is quite extensive. We've sought to capture everything. We need to provide for the for circumstances where further amendments are needed and not have to go through the full legislative process, which is a little more cumbersome, while ensuring that there is the opportunity for debate by both houses. So I'm hoping that persons who have had this concern, that have taken the headline of Minister can amend by order, that they recognize that behind the order lies debate by both houses. So I wanted to make that clear, Mr. President. Amendments are also being proposed to Clause 57 to address certain inconsistencies that existed in the language. Clause 58 provides for enforcement powers where it's suspected that a person has committed an offense under the legislation. And there's also a small amendment to 58(9). And 59, importantly, Mr. President, provides for review of the Act by Parliament. Now, this again was a matter that was subject to bipartisan discussions in the lower house. Originally, it was intended that the first review of the Act would take place 3 years down the line. It was agreed that because this is intended to be so groundbreaking and because the changes are substantive, that we would, in fact, as a Parliament, review 18 months after the appointed day notice, or the appointed day, rather, not the notice itself. So, Mr. President, this should allow for greater comfort with the process and the ability to raise issues if they are perceived later down the line. Mr. President, Clause 60 and 61 address the matter of consequential amendments and amendment of enactment, which is driven by the very same principle that I just spoke to, which is the ability to, the need for these matters to come before both houses of Parliament for amendment, or sorry, for debate. And Part 12, which deals with the transitional provisions, clauses 62 to 65, which are necessary to transform the RGD, or rather absorb it into the NERA. And these are all set out here, Mr. President. There are some amendments which may address terminology. For example, in 62, we have an inaccurate reference to the Registrar General's Department. The law treats it differently. It should be referred to as a General Register Office. So some tidying up, clarifying amendments are made there. Clause 63 makes sure that all rights, responsibilities, and privileges of what will be, on the appointed day, the former Registrar General's Department in the authority. And in light of the amendment to Clause 5.2, which was much earlier in this presentation, in changing the terminology, Clause 63.4 is being amended for consistency. 64 addresses the transfer of persons permanently appointed to offices in the former RGD to the authority, and amendments are being proposed with regard to the transition process that relate to staff, and that those are, again, addressed in respect of 64. 65 provides for the rollover of officers and employees holding fixed-term contracts under the former RGD, again, to continue to hold similar offices or employment under the current authority under the same terms. Mr. President, first schedule, as indicated earlier, deals with the board, the appointment, conditions, tenure, and removal of members of boards of the authority. Again, we already spoke about the fact that the Governor General is responsible for appointment and revocation of appointments. And paragraph 2.1 of the first schedule, I'll draw attention to that because it outlines individuals who shall not be eligible for appointment to the board. And it should be noted that paragraph 2.2 requires that board members should provide voluntary declarations that they are not ineligible for appointment to the board. So that, of course, if it is that they are found to have not disclosed or to have inaccurately stated their ineligibility, it will provide a contractual and other documentary basis for addressing that falsehood. Mr. President, the second schedule deals with the funds of the resources and its borrowing powers, deals with its ability to charge fees, etc. And the amendments that I spoke to earlier about no fees for the first or renewal is now consistent with the provisions of the schedule. Third schedule deals with the contents of the database, Mr. President, the information that will be stored in the database about an individual. So it includes identity information as well as information for the generation of statistical information. And it's important to note that Part C provides that the demographic information listed may be provided for inclusion in the database. It is not mandatory. Although it is required for statistical purposes, citizens will be encouraged to provide it, but will not be compelled so to do. Mr. President, fourth schedule sets out offences and penalties for breaches, and the fifth schedule addresses the appeal tribunal, as well as the appointment, tenure, and removal of its members. The sixth schedule deals with the matters of amendment and repeal of consequential legislation, and there are amendments that are being proposed in the list of amendments to correct errors of language and to ensure consistency with other provisions in the bill. So, Mr. President, in closing, two words which I'm sure everyone will welcome this morning. The National Identification System, when implemented, will have a positive, transformative effect on Jamaica. It will improve how we do business, and it will improve the lives and productivity of our citizens. All Jamaicans will become known to the state. They will become part of the state. We will be an inclusive and included people, and people will be included in the state's operations. Because we speak consistently, Mr. President, about sustainable and inclusive growth. But for us to be truly inclusive, people must not only know the state must know the people who we serve. It's for this reason, Mr. President, that fundamentally NIDS has been made a national priority. The development of a national civil and identity management system in Jamaica will support ease of doing business, help the nation leverage its potential to improve security in our nation, advance service delivery to our people, and fight poverty and corruption. Mr. President, I very much look forward to the contributions and support of senators on both sides as we seek to bring into law next week the National Identification and Registration Bill 2017. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. You had said that you were just going to open today. Did I understand you to say that members could submit to you between now and next week any specific problems, difficulties that they have?
Yes, Mr. President. In fact, I would welcome if there are outstanding issues on our reading of the amendments, if you would submit matters that you're suggesting for amendments so that the technical people can look at them to help us to move with alacrity. It certainly won't prevent members from raising the issues in their debate for a sort of public hearing of your concerns, but it would allow for the technical team to address them more fully rather than trying to treat with them on the fly. As indicated, it is important, it's critical in fact, that we close on Friday, next Friday, and therefore anything that we can do to make the process move more effectively would certainly be welcome. So thank you for that prompt, Mr. President. Much appreciated.
Mr. President,
thank you.
In order to facilitate this process which has been suggested by the leader, it would be very helpful if her presentation were to be circulated to us at the earliest.
Thank you very much. You have a commitment there. Do I have your commitment there?
Answered. Absolutely, Mr. President. Mr. President, having opened the debate, I wish to ask for suspension of the debate to the next sitting of the Senate.
The question is that the debate opened by the Minister on the National Identification System be suspended until until the next sitting of the Senate. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is not intended to do any further business today, and I ask, therefore, that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed.
Just before Just before I put that, I would just like to make reference to a number of matters. It was remiss of me previous to today to mention the passing of a great Jamaican and a particularly important civil servant, Mr. Colin Bullock, who passed on the 18th of October, former financial secretary, deputy governor of the Bank of Jamaica, head of PIOJ, former lecturer at the University of the West Indies in the Department of Economics. So we make note of his passing, and I ask that it be placed on the record of the Senate. Secondly, I would like to welcome Ms. Susan Goff and Mr. Roger Malcolm from JFJ. You're always welcome at our sittings, and it's lovely to see both of you. Please return on any occasion when you feel the need to do so. The question is that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. Those in favor? Against? Senate now stands adjourned.